Hello, my name is Bob Plaschke. Welcome to First Response. For most of my adult life, I've had the privilege to spend time with and serve emergency responders, firefighters, EMS, and police officers. First Response, this podcast, is an effort really to get behind the badge, behind that officer, and really understand the highs and lows that emergency responders face, and then how they handle them. This podcast is sponsored by PepperBall, where I have the honor to serve as the CEO. PepperBall makes a non-lethal alternative to guns that police use to keep themselves and the public they serve safe. My guest today is Corporal Adam Gardner. Corporal Adam Gardner is an officer in Leander, Texas. Corporal, and maybe I can call you Adam. Welcome to the show. Tell me, you and I were chatting about an incident that was fundamental to your career, where your partner was shot in the line of duty. Tell me about that. Tell us about what happened.
Sure. Thanks for having me, by the way. Actually, January 4th, 2016, I was working as a police officer in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. And this kind of story starts kind of like a lot of police stories, really. It's just going to be one more quick traffic stop. And I conducted a traffic stop at about 2:15 in the morning for speeding on 67 on a 45 mile per hour zone. And initially, there's nothing out of the ordinary, but I noticed the car was really slow to pull over, which I remember thinking at the time was very strange. And then when the car came to a stop, it stopped on a kind of an overpass. And again, I thought it was really strange. So I exited my patrol car, and as soon as I got out, I smelled a very strong odor of marijuana coming from the car and saw there were 3 occupants inside. So my initial approach to the vehicle, and did the initial 7-step violator contact that we do, and requested backup units to come be with me while I conducted a probable cause search of the car for the odor of marijuana. And during that time, when I was conducting the search, I got the driver out of the car and searched the driver, and I got the front seat passenger out of the car and searched the front seat passenger. And while I was searching the back seat passenger, one of the parties who had already been searched was able to get away from another officer who was watching him and make his way to the driver's seat of the car. And my partner, who I went to the academy with, followed him around to the driver's side. I kind of disengaged the person I was dealing with and went to the front passenger side. And inside of the car, we kind of got into a struggle over the gear shift, trying to keep the car from taking off. And eventually he got it into gear, and I was running along beside the car, and the car was getting faster and faster and faster. And I just remember thinking that I'm going to have to disengage, or I'm going to fall down or get run over by a car or get hit by, the back tire of this car. So I disengaged and remember thinking, hey, I've got 2 other guys, back here I need to go deal with. We can deal with whatever's going on with that car later. And once I got back and got those guys detained, I looked up and realized my partner was gone, and the car was parked about a quarter mile up the road as he was calling for backup on the radio. So I got in my patrol car and I drove up there, and as I exited the car, a gunshot went off. So I went to the rear passenger side of the car and immediately saw kind of the suspect laying between the seats face down, and my partner laying on top of him, and there's just blood everywhere in the back seat of the car. And I remember my vision going straight to a gun that was pointed at me with the suspect's finger on the trigger. So I moved to the other side of the car and got into a struggle with the suspect and was able to get his other hand into handcuffs about the time another partner was showing up, and we were able to get the suspect into custody. So after that, I got my partner out of the car, and he had a through and through gunshot wound that was pretty severe to his right forearm, and he also had a couple holes you could see right on his chest. So like he'd been shot in the chest, and he'd also been shot in the other shoulder. So I put him in my car and I was driving him to the hospital, and I just remember during that drive talking to him and him not answering, and the auditory exclusion and all the things you had heard about in training that I never really experienced myself. I heard noise, but I couldn't focus on any one noise. And I remember talking to my friend in the back seat, him just not answering, and me thinking, hey, I need to drive faster. I need to drive faster. My friend, he's dying or he's dead in my back seat. If I can get him to the hospital a little faster, maybe they can save him. So it's probably about I don't know, in retrospect, probably about a 3-minute drive to the hospital, and got him to the hospital. And when the back door opened, he got out and everybody took him inside. And I just remember being so surprised because I never heard him speaking to me, and I thought he was dead. I didn't understand what was going on. There were so many other thoughts, in this struggle with this suspect that I remember going through my mind. And um, the incident seemed like it lasts forever, but in retrospect, the time from the traffic stop starting to being at the hospital for a little while was about, I don't know, 22, 23 minutes. And I learned a lot from that incident, kind of about human performance and how you perform under stress, and kind of random thoughts that pop in your mind, even while you're, focused on what you're doing. And, thankfully, my partner ended up being okay, and he's thrived in his career since. He's since been promoted, and he's still working patrol.
Oh, well, I'm so happy that, as we discussed earlier, happy that that was a kind of a I wouldn't call it a happy ending, but an ending where at least your partner was okay and could get back and continue in the line of duty.
Sure.
Um, it turns out, and Adam, it's okay for me to call you Adam.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you. It turns out that for those who are listening, it's around 400 officers are shot in the line of duty each year. That number kind of goes up and down. But across almost a million police officers, it's still a more of a rare event than not.
Sure.
We had talked earlier. You said that when this incident happened, you just revert back to your training because it's probably the only thing that you can do. I would imagine that you were well trained in, or at least you'd gone through training in the academy and on an ongoing basis to prepare yourself. But how did the training help, and did it hinder, or was it what were the goods and bads of the training that you had?
I was really blessed in my academy. I had an excellent cadre of instructors, and I always took training very serious because in a field like police work, there is so unpredictable. I mean, like you said, 400 officers a year are shot in the line of duty, and there's almost a million. But for those 400 officers, that's the most important day of their life. And it all comes down to just a game of seconds, really. And so I had great instructors in the academy, and you talk about force options, and you get qualified on different weapon systems and stuff like that. And then going through in service every year. And during that incident, I just remember thinking my partner had intended to discharge his firearm, but his arm was disabled from being shot. And I just remember thinking that I don't know if I could shoot this guy, if I would accidentally hit my partner, or what my best force option was. So I just went hands on, and it was lucky for me he didn't have another weapon, and I was able to get him into custody. But my training was great, and like it's really like I've heard other people say that's been in similar or other use of force incidents where it's just like your body's kind of on autopilot. But I don't think if you don't plant those seeds and good training from the front, I don't your body wouldn't be able to do that. And kind of always tell people, your body can't go where your mind's never been. So if you're not pre-gaming these things kind of along the lines and throughout your career, when that second hits, it could be detrimental to you.
And for the audience, Corporal Gardner has dedicated his career beyond this incident to training and becoming certified in a number of different technologies and tactics and approaches that's available to police officers. And it's kind of his passion is around training for to train folks so that they are prepared in that context. Tell me, Adam, how is training, and not surprisingly, as just from this example, training is critical, and it's what you do kind of off the job that prepares you for the one time or two times in your career that you have to do it.
Sure.
How has training changed since you started almost 18 years ago?
Well, I think a lot of officers, take different levels of seriousness to training, and some people kind of go through it with, checking the box mentality. But I think as we as a profession have developed and gotten wiser and been exposed to new incidents. I think that we've really been able to kind of take a step out of the box and get away from the traditional, silo training that today you're going to go to the range and you're going to do your firearms qualification, or you're coming to do your taser qualification or your PepperBall qualification or whatever it is, to kind of broaden those horizons. So we kind of work the problem all the way through versus, just we're going to go focus on one thing, because in real time, when these incidents happen, you have all these other tools at your disposal, and you need to be comfortable with all the tools, but you also need to have the confidence and abilities to kind of work the problem all the way through.
Well, it strikes me. I was looking up on the internet the number of officers that ever discharge their gun is somewhere between 12 and 15%, and those that ever would, and that is actually just pull their gun out of the holster, and then those that would do it more than once is around 5%. So it's a rare event.
Sure.
And I think you mentioned before you've never been forced to pull your gun from your holster.
Pull my gun, but I've never discharged my gun at anybody.
Here's the question: if the training is primarily focused around going to the shooting range or
Sure.
getting your PepperBall certification, but if these weapons you rarely the vast majority of your job is not to discharge a weapon or a weapon system, is there enough training on and what is the training for the other 85% or 90% of the time when you won't do that?
Right. That's a great question, right? A lot of people, when they get into police work, they think about, driving cars and shooting guns, but there's so much more to it. Annual qualifications for all of our weapon systems is a thing that we do every year, but it's really how can you evolve training and do reality-based training where there's decision making to decide, hey, what's the best tool for the situation that you've been put into, and kind of like I said earlier, getting out of those silos of we're going to focus on one thing.
And mentally, I had an officer on one of my first podcasts. He talked about stoicism and the notion of how to have the right mental attitude so that you could make good decisions. How do our police officers train today to and again, you mentioned virtual reality as one, but how in terms of doing those split second assessments? I mean, how do you train your mind to do that?
I think you really have to train your mind to think about, one, what's important now. And you kind of have to, in your mind, pregame, possible outcomes for every call that you go to. You could be dispatched to a disturbance. It could be what the detail says, or it could be a completely different thing, and just kind of go down those rabbit holes in your mind of this could be this could be this. And when I get there, if this happens, I'm going to respond like this. And if this happens, I'm going to respond like that. Uh, because if you haven't thought about any of those things, you're going to be delayed in your reaction. And we already know that action is faster than reaction. So anything that we do that delays our reaction is just going to put us further behind the 8 ball.
And in the context of what you're doing today in terms of training folks on your police force and the work you're doing kind of more broadly in educating your brethren, how many hours would you say that you spend every year in what I would call non-tool training, where you're not practicing a particular tactical system, where you're just focused on what you've just described, this pre-gaming, this thinking through the scenario training?
So for our agency, like new hires after they get out of the academy, we do a month-long orientation with the new officers, and that's where we do a lot of policy discussions, but we do a lot of training, is weapons-based training and stuff like that. And during that, we always hit on that topic. So for them, that's a month long of talking about this stuff over and over and over. And we use that traffic stop that I spoke with you earlier about. It's kind of a case study, because I think it really does give some value to training when you can personalize an incident and it's not just some random person that you don't know, in the video that's involved. So, and then for officers, I would say probably 10 to 20 hours a year, maybe. outside of, weapons-based training?
You know, there's some people that will be listening to us and they'll say, hard to, hard to old dog, new tricks, so to speak. Hard to get police officers that have been, been on the force 10, 15 years to change their ways, particularly as policing has changed and evolved over the last couple of decades. I think you had a great quote about, you said officers hate two things. What are the two
Yeah,
things?
so, and it's not just officers, but this is my career field. But I always say that police officers hate two things: they hate change and they hate the way things are. So with
Well,
that kind of in mind, they don't want to do they don't want to change, but they don't like the way things are. So it's, people are a little slower to adopt new theories and new ideas, but once they go through the training and they see why this is relevant and they can kind of see everything put together, you really kind of see the light bulb come on. And when that light bulb comes on, you see it click, or maybe down a couple months later, maybe a year later, somebody says, "Hey, I remember that, and that kind of came up today, and thanks," and that really makes it worth it.
well, and so for those, so is it? I mean, maybe it's just the fact that police officers, they put their own lives in the, kind of in harm's way every day. The motivation to improve, the motivation to make sure, to improve the way things are today. Maybe that is enough motivation for them to really lean in on the training. Because you would think, I just, it seems it's, that should be pretty top of mind if indeed, any day they could run into that same type of traffic accident, and any day
Sure.
they could be involved in that same situation. You so y- Generally you find the officers more leaning in than not, I would imagine.
Yeah, I think so. Like I tell people, you're literally one call away from something potentially catastrophic happening. And if you haven't trained and you haven't had the thought processes of how you're going to handle this, when it comes, you're going to be too slow to react. And it's not fair to you, it's not fair to your family, and it's not fair to the citizens that you're there to, protect and serve, to not take training seriously. And I'm very lucky in my agency. I think that the vast majority takes their training very seriously. They seek training from outside sources. So I'm really lucky in that aspect of it. And in my previous agency, it was the same way. So I can't say what the mindset is nationwide, but I've been at a relatively large agency and I've been at a mid-sized agency, and the mindset's been pretty consistent as far as being receptive to training and new ideas.
Yeah, and frankly, I've seen the same thing as I've traveled across the country. Is that as I tell friends, I haven't met officers who are resistant to change. I have not met officers who don't want to do the right thing. I mean, it's, if you think about the risks that you're taking, you are doing it because you want to do the right thing, and because you want to do the right thing and you want to get home safely. You do take the training seriously, and you do want to change and see that, and change for the better. So in general, I don't find a lot of old dogs who don't want to change their
Yeah.
spots or change their tricks, so to speak. I want to just go back to the incident. There's always stories, about people who are involved in these kind of traumas. Your mind, to your point, flashes. Flashes to your family, flashes to, because you're in truly in harm's way. When you came upon, when you saw the gun, what did your mind? What happened? I mean, what did you
You,
think at that moment?
there's a saying in training of, get off the X. So move somewhere else. And I just remember thinking that in my mind, like, get off the X, move out of the way. And you're not going to do any good to anybody if you're shot. So I moved and went to the other side of the car where I didn't know what was on the other side, but I knew there was a gun on this side and it wasn't safe. And then kind of, getting into more of the details of the weird kind of random thoughts that kind of just flashed my mind. Like I was doing work and, doing what I needed to do, but there was so much, it was really cold. It was probably in the low 30s. And I remember like being up to my elbows in, blood in this backseat of this car, and just remember thinking how warm it felt and how really kind of honestly how it felt good because I was so cold. but also how nasty it was. Never in my life outside of like my family have I ever touched, somebody's blood, and just thinking, hey, I wish I had gloves on because I don't know whose this is, but this isn't sanitary. And just thinking these crazy little random little thoughts all the while working. And then, like I said, getting my partner out of the car and seeing, you know, the shape that he was in, and then relaying that information to people, and just also the camaraderie. Like, I'd worked on the same shift for the same people for 4 years, and I had one of my friends who literally broke his car trying to drive to help, and it was really scary at the time, right? But in retrospect, it was a really amazing incident to be able to experience that had a positive outcome for my partner, and really kind of guided my career of, if I can have an impact on somebody else and personalize these experiences to where they take training seriously and use good tactics so they can survive, and then they can go and continue to thrive and have a great career.
Well, I mean, that's what training. I mean, you've kind of the essence of training, particularly in a policing context. One last question about this incident. There's always this discussion, and you read about academic articles when researchers look at use of force, and they say that your adrenaline kicks in, and to some degree, the adrenaline, the kind of fight or flight construct, and you guys, you have no choice but to fight. It kind of kicks in, and it can sometimes overwhelm the logic. You can just kind of get you get lost in the moment. Did
Sure.
you feel did you feel the adrenaline? Did you feel that construct, that notion of of not losing control, but just focusing on the fight, so to speak?
No, I never felt a loss of control. Like, when you see the body camera footage, there's definitely like a elevated voice tones and stuff like that that you don't remember, and just the rapid breathing. But it's all stuff I had learned about in training. You kind of get that tunnel vision and the audio distortion and stuff like that, slow motion time. And I kind of experienced that stuff, but I knew that stuff was possible in these high stress, tense, uncertain, rapidly evolving situations. So I think knowing that it's possible, it allows you to kind of work through it. And then at the end, as far as adrenaline goes, I remember having that adrenaline dump and just feeling, so tired afterwards. But again, I kind of knew that was to be expected as well. So I think without the training, I could see, kind of not understanding what your body's doing and how it's trying to kick up all those different things in your body to really help you fight through. You could kind of become overwhelmed if you were unaware that that was going to happen.
Well, Adam, appreciate one. Happy that you and your partner came through it okay. Happy that you had the benefit of being trained in Winston Salem. I think where you started your career, that they invested the time in training, and that your current department continues to believe that's important. And thank you for not only your service, but thank you for um, kind of the dedication to your craft, and to pushing out this notion of education and training to your fellow officers. Super appreciate that. I have
I
one
really
last,
appreciate it.
absolutely. I have one last question for you. This one's an easy one.
Okay.
PepperBall is going to donate to your favorite charity. So to say thank you for taking the time
Awesome.
on this podcast, what charity can we donate to?
St. Jude's. That would be great.
Oh, fantastic. Well, again, I'll give you the official name, Corporal Gardner. Thank you for taking the time to be here on the First Response podcast. We super appreciate your service and appreciate the time you spent with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Well, folks, I found that discussion super interesting. It's the first time I've been able to in depth interview someone who's actually been in the battle, and talk about what they go through. In what we do at PepperBall, we engage agencies every day, and we put a heavy emphasis on training on our equipment. But this is a discussion about the criticality of training and the more generic, or the more broader training of how an officer has to prepare themselves in terms of when they indeed are involved in a situation where the adrenaline kicks in and the fight or flight responses kick in. And I found it so interesting how Corporal Gardner talked about, being taught about how to manage his breathing, and that he had remembered that the training around how time slows down, and how auditory, the tunnel vision and the tunnel hearing, probably to some degree, and how your mind gets focused. And what I would say, for those who don't know much about policing, as I'm myself, I'm just learning, is that it's the amount of training that police officers go through is impressive. It's increasing, and it's really important. It's a big deal. And so as the budget constraints emerge, training is the one area I've seen consistently that they maintain the line. They'd rather have less officers and maintain the training, because they have to ensure that when an officer like Corporal Gardner gets involved, that they have been well prepared. And frankly, I think the U.S. Policing does a fantastic job of that. And it was great to kind of hear about it today. So, as always, I'm grateful to be able to work with and support folks like Colonel Gardner and the policing in the United States. This is such a privilege to be the CEO of PepperBall. And we'll see you next time. Thanks much.